Hello people, hello YouTube. So this is my 15th video on how to follow Jesus Christ, and this is part 2 of Portrait of Jesus Christ. I'll read the introduction. The Apostle Peter wrote concerning the prophets of the Old Testament that the Spirit of Christ within them predicted the sufferings of Christ, and that the glory of was to follow. 1 Peter chapter 1 verses 10 to 11. At times these prophets spoke in the first person of going through experiences that never actually happened to them, but did happen to Jesus later in life. They described first the sufferings of the Christ, the Messiah, and then the eternal glory in which he was to enter. Such predictions occur most frequently in the Psalms of David and Isaiah, and this study contains various examples. So section D, Messiah's suffering. Question 38. Was the Messiah to be accepted or rejected by his own people? Isaiah chapter 53 verses 1 to 3 says he was to be rejected. Question 39. Did Israel as a nation accept or reject Jesus? John chapter 1 verse 11 and John chapter 12 verses 37 to 38 says they rejected him. Question 40. By what kind of person was the Messiah to be betrayed by? Psalms 41 verse 9 says by a friend, so he was going to be betrayed by a friend. Question 41. By whom was Jesus betrayed by? Mark chapter 14 verse 10 says Judas. Question 42. Was this man a friend of Jesus? Matthew chapter 26 verses 47 and 50 says yes, so Judas Iscariot was a friend of Jesus and also a disciple. Question 43. What price was the Messiah to be betrayed by? Zechariah chapter 11 verse 12 says 30 shekels of silver, so a shekel was a currency back then. 44. Question 44. How much money did Jesus' betrayer receive? Matthew chapter 26 verse 15 says 30 pieces of silver. Question 45. What was to be done with the money of the Messiah's betrayal? Zechariah chapter 11 verse 13 says to be thrown into the treasury. Question 46. What was done with the money of Jesus' betrayal? Matthew chapter 27 verses 3 through to 7 says they bought the potter's field to bury the foreigners. So they used the So it was thrown into the potter's field to be bought. So basically they took it into the treasury of the temple and then bought a potter's field with that money. Question 47. Was the Messiah to defend himself before his accusers? Isaiah chapter 53 verse 7 says no, so he did not defend himself. Question 48. How did Jesus react to his accusers? Matthew chapter 26 verses 62 to 63 and Matthew chapter 27 verses 12 through to 14 says he gave no answers, so he didn't defend himself whatsoever. Question 49. Was the Messiah to be beaten and spat upon? Isaiah chapter 50 verse 6 says yes. 50. Name 2 ways in which Jesus suffered at the hands of his oppressors. Mark chapter 14 verse 65 and John chapter 19 verse 1 says he was spat upon and beaten. Question 51. What kind of people were to be executed together with the Messiah? Isaiah chapter 53 verse 12 says robbers. So robbers were to be executed along with Jesus. 52. Question 52. Who were the 2 men crucified together with Jesus? Matthew chapter 27 verse 38 says robbers. Question 53. Name 2 parts of the Messiah's body that were to be pierced. Psalms chapter 22 verse 16 says hands and feet. Question 54. Was Jesus pierced in his hands and feet? Luke chapter 24 verses 39 through to 40 And John chapter 20 verse 25 to 27 says yes. Question 55. What was to happen to Messiah's garments and clothing? Psalms chapter 22 verse 18 says, divide his clothes among themselves. Question 56. What did the Roman soldiers do with the garments and the tunic of Jesus? John chapter 19 verses 23 through to 24 says, divide them among themselves. So they divided Jesus' clothes among themselves. Question 57. What were they to give to the Messiah to drink? Psalms 69 verse 27 says, vinegar. Question 58. What did they give Jesus to drink? John chapter 19 verse 29 says, sour wine or vinegar. It was the same thing. Question 59. What could not happen to the Messiah's bones? Psalms 34 verses 19 through to 20 says, they will not be broken. Question 60. Were the bones of Jesus broken? John chapter 19 verse 33 and 36 says no. So Jesus' bones were not broken. Question 61. What was the Lord to lay upon the Messiah? Isaiah chapter 53 verse 6 says, the iniquity of us all. So he's going to lay the sin of all mankind, past, present and future generations' sins upon Jesus. Question 62. What was to happen to the Messiah as a result? As Isaiah chapter 53 verse 8 says, cut off from the land of the living. So he was to bear the sin so much that he would actually die from the stress and the strain of it. Question 63 says, what did Jesus bear on the cross? 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 24 says, our sins. Question 64. What happened to Jesus as a result? 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 18 says, put to death in the flesh. Question 65. In what kind of tomb was the Messiah to be buried in? Isaiah 53 verse 9 says, a rich man. Question 66. Whose tomb was Jesus buried in? Matthew chapter 27 verse 57 through to 60 says, Joseph or Joseph of Arimathea. Question 67. What kind of person was he? Matthew chapter 27 verse 57 says, a rich man. So Joseph of Arimathea was a rich person. And I'm going to split the videos here. I'll see you in the next part. Bye.